Okay, so I'm gonna get right into it because I'm running short on time here. When I was walking around, I'd come across various people, and it put me in various situations you might describe as precarious or risky, where I had to make certain judgment calls, right? Whether to sort of start a conflict over any perceived slighting or injustice in regards to um, the dealings I made on the street, buying cannabis on the street, which is actually more safe than alcohol. It kills far less people than alcohol every day. Every year, but every day as well. So I had to kind of reconcile various things. One is that when you're a Nigerian and you're a bigger Nigerian or a better warrior Nigerian, things of this nature, that you're from the toughest group of people on the planet, right? It's tougher than the Germans, the Russians. It's tougher than people from Sierra Leone, Angola, South Africa, you name it, right? It's the toughest group. So part of your natural inclination is a lethal grace for authority. So as I'm coming across, mostly Northern Hispanic gang members, thugs, those are mainly the people I'd ask about the weed, their middlemen, what have you. Okay, I didn't want to, like a lot of people, I didn't want to take any shit from anybody. Now, it's a little bit different than being African American, right? So some people say just because you're black doesn't mean you're tough. Well, there's a difference between, Carlton and Snoop Dogg and Debo from Friday or something. So when you're significantly tougher than other people, right, it's hard to kind of shake it off. And what I did was shake it off because I'm wise first, and then I'm tough. And there's a lot of people who are kind of betas that work for the state, a lot of cops who are corrupt, a lot of various people in the military that they know that Nigerians are tougher than them, and they work with various psychological operation units, and they have a certain relationship with the gangs in the street. And they want to, kind of try to leverage their numbers to try to make it seem like the military's the toughest or something, right? For example, if you talk about gangs, guns, they might say, that's nothing compared to the guns they've seen in the military. You talk about hand-to-hand combat, they might try to, represent for the Navy SEALs, what have you. Okay, so they're trying to constantly make themselves seem like they're tougher, and think about drill sergeants, what have you. You'll get what I'm saying real fast. Okay, so that factored in, right? That's a part of this story, me shrugging it off. And I wanted to really get into the idea that it is stupid to kind of look at things in terms of someone owes you $20, we'll go, do something stupid to them or something, right? That it's stupid to jump to that conclusion. And that was a major part of my life where there was a lot of situations where I was in where, everyone who's on my side isn't around, and I'm walking around by myself in my own zone, brokenhearted, looking for weed. And I was put in these very risky situations, and where I'm sitting there anxious whether or not the person's going to come back with the weed and what have you. And you can imagine it was a lot of stress. And it's how society's structured, the laws, the way people interact, the way people don't have a lot of love for other races. Some of these homeboys are cooler than others, right? Northern Hispanic gang members, but it still plays out a certain way. That's the streets in Morgan Hill. To some degree is no exception, and to some degree is street back then as well. Okay, remember that they're changing my voice. In the last clip, I sort of went over the fact that there's a sort of integrated system that's in place already, and has several very influential, industrialist types, wealthy businessmen, internationalists, members of the Council on Foreign Relations, various groups have pointed out that they wanted a more integrated system. So how integrated was it, 20 years ago, 30, actually more like 30, around 30, 27 years ago, 25, when I used to walk around, okay, when I wasn't hanging out with my friends in San Jose or something, when I was in Morgan Hill by myself, right? What was the system like? Well, first, let's address the opposition view. Let's put them to rest. Let's play them out as they've been trying to play out people like me by, making conspiracy theorists famous who are saying something similar in a way that's not so believable. And some even talk about freaking, aliens, right? And I said it like that for a reason, to make it harder for them to take me out of context. Okay, so point number one. Do they admit the ancient Greeks and ancient Romans existed, right? Do they admit the ancient Greece and ancient Rome were actual places? Let's start there, because some of the things that they deny are so obvious. Like when they deny that racism's a problem in America, right? Some of the things are very, very, very obvious. So do they admit that Greece and Rome in the ancient world, right, in antiquity, what have you, in the ancient world, do they admit that they existed? And they were actual places. Point number two, do they admit that Greek frats and sororities, okay, and the Club of Rome exist? And the Greek frats and sororities historically were about social control, right? Trying to make sure that college graduated people in a certain way that would create a certain social order. Okay, they'd have certain existing social relations and ways of thinking and modes of thinking that made it so that the greater social orders in society played out a certain way. Do they admit that? As you admit that, you basically already admitted that I'm right. You think about how many people graduate each year from Greek frats and sororities and what kind of jobs they do and what have you. Because one of the most powerful groups in society, the Club of Rome, has some of the most influential people in popular culture as their members. So why are they called the Club of Rome, right? And Romans were notorious for behind-the-scenes manipulation. Okay. Point number 3. Do they admit that the Senate exists and that Rome had a Senate? Point number 4. Do they admit that many rich people have Greek statues and or paintings of Greek goddesses, Greek gods and goddesses, right? Maybe of a fountain, a water fountain, and what have you. They admit this. Point number 5. Do they admit that a huge part of the Western occult, which is extremely popular these days and everyone knows it, right, is Greco-Roman mythology? Okay, feminists who are into the occult, for example, and they talk about the winter solstice and da-da-da, they often worship, maybe Athena and ideas like this. Okay. Hecate and Circe and what have you. Okay. Point number 6. Do they admit that many gang members use Roman numerals, right? Like XIV, right? X111. Okay. Do they admit that they use Roman numerals? These are some of the biggest gangs in America, and they're using Roman numerals. Okay. And of course we have, groups like the Vice Lords, the Gangster Disciples. Okay. And who are they, what gangsters are they talking about? To some degree, they're talking about Al Capone, right? And these people who were Italians, who were very much associated with Rome. Okay. A lot of Italians have said that the Italians built Rome, and that's how strong that association is. And of course, they admit the history of the mafia and so on and so forth. So it's pretty straightforward that it's a Greco-Roman system. And the Romans occupied England, right, for hundreds of years. America's part of what's called the Anglosphere, the Anglo-Saxon kind of spheres of influence, right, the English spheres of influence. And a lot of the richer people here are of English descent to this day. And of course, the Klan was a Nordic group which was started by someone of English descent, Nathan Bedford Forrest, at least in popular culture. Okay, so now let's get into kind of some individual stories without naming names and places and so on and so forth. Okay, so one time I had this at what you might call a beef with one of the children, one of the people at Live Oak. And just like with Lincoln, where he was much older than me, right, when I was in country school, there's a lot of situations like this that the government set up, right, where this guy, his older brother was from Seven Trees. He's probably like maybe three years older than me. And so I was probably about 16, and he was probably about 19. And, it was like he was second or third year senior, and his mother and his family knew the staff there, and he had a history of cooperating with the staff, and that helped him try to graduate. Okay, and so I remember one time a police officer came and he said, "What's it going to do to end this rivalry with you and this gentleman? We'll call him Gentleman A." Okay, and so that spills over into the streets in Morgan Hill, because he lived in Morgan Hill, even though his older brother was from San Jose, from the Seven Tree Gangster Crip gang, as the story goes, right? I didn't know all these guys personally super well or something, but that's what everyone was saying. Okay, and so, I'm at the village, and back then people there, the people there were tougher than the people now. The people now are kind of, less kind of menacing. And less tough than the people then, right? Basically. Now, I don't know every gang member then, I don't know every gang member now, right? And I don't know too much of their inner workings in the first place to have really any sensitive information that the state doesn't know already, kind of thing. And they know a lot more about that than the government does than I do. But, yeah, that was the case. So I'm there, and what basically happens is, I'm waiting for a sack or something, and some dude takes my phone and runs away, right? He runs away hella fast, and I'm like faded, and I'm like, man, I'm gonna chase after him. Some other guy was like, okay, he said that if it was me, that he'd chase after him. And I felt like they were trying to set me up, right? And lo and behold, later on, here comes this guy who I had problems with from Live Oak, who, we'll get into that in the next part, because I'm running out of time in this part, if I'm not mistaken. The clips are kind of disorganized here. who came up behind me and he tries to put his hand in my pocket, showing that he's aware.